will start with you, Izzy. Do you want to kind of explain what you exactly mean by kind of fertility awareness, educator? What does that mean for people?
Mm. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be chatting about this. Um, so a fertility awareness educator is someone who can teach and share the fertility awareness method, which is actually not one method, it's an umbrella term for many different methods of essentially identifying your fertile phase and your infertile phase of every menstrual cycle so that you can either avoid pregnancy or conceive, but also these methods give us a very deep understanding of what's going on hormonally throughout our whole cycle so that we can understand if there's something going on at the root, causing us to have symptoms, causing us to have cycle conditions. And we can use this information that we can gather literally from our body, which is giving us signals every day about our fertility and our hormones, but which can be subtle until you actually tune into them. Um, and using these signs, we can build that bigger picture of our health, which in turn helps us understand our mental health and also our spiritual health as well. And um, I think of the menstrual cycle as really like it's our creative essence, and that's how it's spoken about in Chinese medicine as well. Um, our reproductive health is so linked to our our overall well-being and vitality. Um, so that's what I teach. And then the fertility awareness method mastery practitioner, which is quite a mouthful, that is about so when I started teaching FAM, I noticed that people were coming to me and saying, I'd really love to learn this and do this method, but I have endometriosis, or I think I have PCOS, or I've got really irregular cycles, and will this work for me? And I knew that it would work for them, but I also felt quite underexperienced in dealing with cycles that weren't kind of textbook. And honestly, that's most people's cycles. So I decided to work with Lisa Hendrickson Jack, who's the author of The Fifth Vital Sign, which is a really amazing book. And she's developed this way of working with the symptothermal method of fertility awareness so that you, as I was speaking about, so that you can use it as a way of understanding what's going on with your hormones. And really working with something like PCOS, or even when you've got missing periods and you're not sure where your periods are, you can actually use FAM, strangely enough, even though you would think, oh, I'm not having a period, so that means I can't track anything. You can actually really use FAM as an amazing tool to support you in that healing journey.
What kind of led you down this path? Like, why this in particular?
So my own journey, as it normally is, very horrible experiences with hormonal birth control from about age 15. I kind of tried everything. And I thought of myself as quite an expert in contraception at that time because I actually was an actor for student doctor exams. So I would go and do scenarios with them when I was 15. And my favorite one was where I was a 16-year-old girl coming to the doctor needing contraception. And the doctor's role and the way that they would pass their test was to um, essentially not let me leave without giving me the depot shot. Giving me the depot shot. Um, which is the whole thing of itself. But at the time, what I got from that little job that I used to do was that I would sit there and hear them, hear multiple doctors telling me all the options. And, you know, I felt like I was this expert in in contraception at that time. So when I wanted that for myself, it was actually I felt quite empowered in the experience of going to my doctor and asking for what I wanted and knowing what I wanted. But unfortunately, none of them felt good in my body, and like a range of side effects from like pelvic pain nearly every day to just the kind of general sense of like, this isn't right. So quite a variety of things. Um, and so when I was actually can barely remember like the timeline of this, but I think early 20s, I just said, I can't do any of this anymore. Not knowing anything about FAM at the time. Um, I was lucky enough to read the book Period Power, which I think a lot of people know by Maisie Hill, and I think has done such a good job of popularizing cycle awareness. And in that book, she talks about FAM. And so I just grabbed onto that. And through that, charting, tracking my cycles, just learning so much about myself and also realizing that so for a long time, I thought I had bipolar when I was a teenager. Realizing, oh, it's PMS. It's not, it's not bipolar. And that was, yeah, a massive revelation. Um, and so, yeah, through that, got into the work of the Red School, which I'm sure Lisa's going to speak about, and um, menstruality. And then I started teaching and sharing, or sharing really, not teaching, but sharing around menstruality and the cycle seasons and how that had supported me with quite severe PMS. Um, but then I realized that there were some things that like there were basic gaps in education that I wanted to talk about in those sessions. And I just couldn't like it, for instance, like even just basic understanding of like what is ovulation and does it happen once in your cycle? Does it happen multiple times? Um, and just like these physiological realities that I just found that I found myself much more drawn to sharing around that actual concrete part, the physicality of the cycle. So that's when I decided to get the FAM educator training.
And you talk about kind of thinking that you had bipolar in your teenage years. And what were the kind of healthcare professionals saying around that? Was that something you were presenting to them as well, or were you keeping that kind of a little bit hidden because you didn't want to talk about it, or
Um, I I never it wasn't really in my family culture to go to a doctor around mental health stuff. So yeah, and I'm quite glad actually because I think it could have definitely have led me down a path of medication, and I think that's really not what I would have needed at the time. Um, and so yeah, I was just with it, and I remember I applied to do a master's after graduating from uni. And it was then that I was like, oh, actually, I need to maybe see someone about this because how am I gonna do this master's when I'm like going through these massive waves of energy and emotion? And by that time, I had figured out, okay, it's related to my cycle, and I did go to a doctor about that. But they were quite dismissive. They were like, oh, it's bad PMS, and I can write you a note, but yeah, that was as far as it went.
not really offering you any practical support about how you might be able to navigate
No,
that cycle?
no.
Okay.
But I suppose I didn't necessarily ask them for that. I've always been a bit like standoffish with doctors or like coming into the situation like very clear in what I want and not very open to their suggestions. So I came in saying, I'm doing a master's and I don't know how I'm going to cope. So I need you to like say I have something so I can get support from the uni, or it was more like that. But yeah. Um, I decided not to pursue diagnosis around something like PMDD, because yeah, I didn't think it was as severe as PMDD. I think it was, yeah, I could manage it. Like some cycles, it wouldn't be so bad. And yeah,
Okay. I
trying
think
to figure
we're
it out.
going to talk a little bit more about PMDD
Mm,
with Lisa and what it is specifically. So
yeah.
we'll explore that a little bit more further down the line. I'm curious regarding fertility awareness method. Why do you think someone should choose this method of contraception or of actually trying to conceive over first of all, over this is kind of a two-pronged question. First of all, over kind of hormonal contraception. And secondly, it's not, people might think, oh, that's the app, isn't it? I just need to check the app. But this is different as well. And I think we need to draw that distinction. So let's start with the first kind of question, as in kind of why this over hormonal contraception, and then let's move on to how it differs from just having an app on your phone.
Mm. So, it's going to be a myriad of different reasons for different people and the choices that you make. But I always bring it down to with FAM, you get to maintain the integrity of your menstrual cycle. And that to someone who has not experienced positivity around having a cycle would feel like, you know, well, why do I need to have this thing? It's a burden, gets in the way. But when you've actually experienced the gifts that it can bring to have that cyclicality and that um the powers and the gifts and the lessons of riding your cycle time after time, um, it suddenly just becomes unthinkable to want to shut that down, which hormonal birth control does shut that down. So um, that sense of cyclicality, obviously, it's all around us in the world. Like nature is cyclical, so experience the moon cycles or experience the seasonal cycles. So even if you don't have a menstrual cycle, you are still under the influence of cyclicality. But when you are taking hormonal birth control, you are suppressing that cyclicality that is inherent in your body. Um, and even the copper coil, to some extent, although it's not hormonal, um, what it can do is actually suppress your cycle anyway um, through how it can affect your hormones through the sort of stress of having something inserted in your uterus. Um, yeah. So it's just such a completely different paradigm being able to maintain that menstrual cycle or not having that cycle. And I think, yeah, I guess what we're speaking about today is like, well, why would you want to have a cycle? What is so good about having that? Um, And for me, it's like it's everything. It's my complete anchor to myself, to, the universe or God, whatever you want to call it, that kind of bigger picture, nature, um, and my creativity. And I just can't now imagine not having that, even though I do still experience big lows and, those waves. Um, it's so valuable to me. Uh, And then, yeah, the question of I'm so passionate about this like difference between apps and fertility awareness. So apps which you input some data, so you'll input your basal body temperature. Um, and then the app will give you a prediction of when your fertile phase probably is. And it tends to give you like green days or red days if you're avoiding pregnancy, and then, the other way around if you're trying to conceive. Uh, Fertility awareness is the the actual understanding and the knowing of those green days and red days for yourself. And it's a self-reliance in a way that the app doesn't offer, because the app is, I mean, the app, I'm saying, like, for example, something like Natural Cycles. Um, and yeah, there's a big difference, I feel, between relying those on those algorithms and predictions, um, and actually reading your own body to understand those things and understand what's going on. Um, yeah. And like to me, it feels there's a similar energetics of kind of relying on an app to predict things for you as there is to taking hormonal birth control, for instance, because you're still relying on something external to you. Whereas with fertility awareness, the big key thing is the cervical mucus. This is one of our main signs of fertility. And no app that better than you, or can look at those things, feel them with your hands and read them. So it's a completely different thing.
I think it's just hearing you talk there reminded me of a phrase I heard, and unfortunately, I cannot remember who this was from, but essentially saying being on the pill is female castration. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, yeah, it is. It's chemical castration. And I've only kind of came to that
Mm.
in the last couple of years. And that just really, I was just blown away by that just simple phrase, and how much it can change you. I think a lot of people are on the pill, as I was on the pill before having my kids. I was on a pill where I was still bleeding. And so in my head, I was still having a cycle, as in like, oh, this is still my natural body doing its thing. And I didn't actually realize, and it sounds mad now, but I didn't actually realize that's not what was happening. And it was just the affectation
Mm.
of having a menstrual cycle, but I wasn't actually having a menstrual cycle. I was just bleeding monthly. Um, and it wasn't actually until post kids, because I think like a lot of people, I became kind of sexually active when I was about 15, so went on the pill quite quickly, as in like I'm not becoming pregnant, kind of get on the pill. Kind of had a series of monogamous relationships, so I carried on being on the pill and didn't come off the pill until I decided, oh, actually I do want kids. So being on the pill for almost 20 years, and therefore not actually understanding and knowing my cycle until I stopped breastfeeding my youngest child. So at that point, I was about 39, 40. And to have that whole length of time not actually realizing what my cycle was and how it affected me was actually quite scary. And as I said, I was kind of in this safety net of thinking, oh, I was having my period when I wasn't. And I'm curious, I know you've picked up on this story as well, Izzy. There was a story fairly recently about how more and more people, more and more women are ditching kind of hormonal contraception. Can you pull out any kind of information from that? Because like, again, off the top of my head, I can't remember what the article was saying, but kind of why people are kind of leaving hormonal contraception behind. What's the kind of drive behind that?
Yeah, I think there's been so much information come out around um, side effects and um, yeah, and that kind of that feeling of outrage that it can give you at that word like you when you say chemical castration, and the fact that that it's so not spoken about, that that's what it is. And I think many women feel just really, um, yeah, really angry about the lack of really informed consent around these things, and just being told this is your only option, being told that you're irresponsible if you're not on it. Or for instance, a lot of women go on it for symptoms that they're experiencing, like acne or painful periods, and then learn in later life, well, actually, it's not a cure, it's not a medicine for that, and just feel really let down. Um, and and then even on a subtle level, I think there's this awareness. You know, a lot of women who come to me who want to come off the pill say like, well, it worked for me. I felt fine. I didn't have side effects, but I just feel like I want to know who I am without it.
Mm.
And I feel like I want to trust my emotions as being me and not being this thing that I'm taking. So it's kind of this building awareness of, oh, yeah, we're all actually taking huge amounts of medication every day. And what does that mean? I remember when I would have to sign a form when I was on the pill, and it would be like, are you taking any medication? I'd say no, because I didn't even think of it as a drug, but it is. Um,
And many forms now, actually, I'm just thinking kind of the form you need to fill in when you give blood and stuff. They say any medication excluding hormonal contraception. Again, even within in the societal kind of thing, it's like, oh no, it's not medication, but
yeah,
it is.
yeah, yeah, and I think this awakening to the the power of cyclicality, and the desire to connect with that part of ourself that is, that is nature, and that is this this wild part of ourself that we can draw so much, um yeah, inspiration and power from, and just this desire to really, yeah, connect with that cyclicality.
I think that's a lovely place to leave this part of the panel discussion. We will come back to you, Izzy, because we're going to do it towards the end. We're going to do kind of a one takeaway point that you'd like to kind of offer to the audience. So we'll come back to you in a moment. But thank you so much, and thank you for giving us your wisdom and your knowledge regarding fertility awareness. Method. My mind went blank there. Where is it? But yeah, and again, at the end of this discussion, we'll talk about how people can find out more. And I know that all three of you have events coming up, online events, which I'm really excited about. So thank you so much, Izzy. I really appreciate your time today.